Let me again thank all of you for being here, particularly many of the young people I see, because this really is all about you. It's really for your understanding the importance of history and how history then shapes you as you understand that history into who you become. My becoming a freedom rider, I always go back to starting with the kind of activism I saw in my dad, who was active in Washington, D.C., particularly during the whole period of urban renewal as a way of moving people out of communities, what we call a general global approach to urban renewal, what we call gentrification today. Having grown up in Southwest Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, though there were no legal signs that said colored only, white only, though there was no legality in the sense that that we could not ride on certain bus lines in the city. What was clear is that there was a geographic boundary that was restricted either because of economics and because of the way the city was run. We had a three-person ruling called commissions that ran the city. And of course, that meant that could be done the way that commissioners viewed the city's operation. But having grown up in D.C., at least knowing, number one, that I, a pre-Brown versus Board of Education young man entering junior high school, which was in 1951, we could not attend the schools that were for white students, even though the closest middle school or secondary school or junior high school, as it was called then, which ran from 7th through the 9th grade, I could not go to it, even though the school was 2 blocks away. I had to go to the school that was almost 5 blocks away, only because I could not go to that school. In the process, many of us as young African-American students began an association brought on by that kind of relationship in which many of us developed our relationships with each other. Many of those shaped early in our years. And so my involvement in the sit-ins and the freedom rides, I always want to go back to watching the model of my dad, being active in community work in Southwest Washington. But while in junior high school, there was a dear friend of mine who became a professional singer, and we'll say something about that near the end. I'm not going to run over my time. Is that he was talking then about being a professional singer. He just knew at 13 or 14, these were the age groups of us, that he was going to be a professional singer. But anyway, this young man went off into one career. I ended up going to college after military service to Virginia Union University, which is a predominantly African-American school, private, Baptist, pretty much funded school, which was not at the liberty of government to determine what we did. It was raised by private funds from churches involved, and we could go on and mention other ways in which funds were raised. But while there, when I entered Virginia Union in 1960, that was the year the freedom rides started. I mean, not the freedom rides, the sit-in started. And being at that moment, then going through the sit-ins in Richmond, as was going on in Petersburg at that time, and it was going in other southern jurisdictions. The sit-ins, though, sort of spearhead what leads to eventually, as Dion has mentioned and John has mentioned, the freedom rides. But each of us has his or her own unique story about how they got involved, why they got involved, and what led them to that involvement. One was that I learned early, important from my dad, I mentioned, which I thought lay dormant in me anyway, that this became an experience for me brought on by the image I saw of a bus having been bombed and mobbed on that Mother's Day, which is what was spoken to earlier, that Greyhound bus. And because of that, there was a young man who was an upperclassman, but who was also a part of SNCC. His name was Charles Sherrod, who's part of later on, we'll talk about the Albany movement. Charles Sherrod was trying to see if there were other students at Virginia Union who would be willing to go on the freedom rides. I decided, along with two other students, and Obadiah Sims and a fellow named Raymond Randolph, decided that we would join the freedom rides. And thus, after a final exam on a Friday, that Tuesday, we were on our way on a trailway bus, riding out of Richmond, Virginia, on our way to Mississippi. And about 5 miles or so, or minutes before we got into Jackson, we knew then that arrest was coming. We knew that we would have to confront that. We knew that the goal was to be jailed and not bail. The whole thought was at that time, jail, no bail. And it was a matter of filling up the prison. I mentioned about parchment. So when I was arrested with the two other students and two Yale Divinity students and another woman named Joanne Silverman out of New York, who was a part of the group that was arrested on June 7th, along with me and the two other students from Virginia Union. We ended up, went into the Trailway bus station, as was agreed that you would enter in. The African Americans went into the white section, vice versa. But you knew once you got there, Sheriff Ray would be there to remind you in his own uncanny way that it's time for you to move, that you're not going to be served. You move or you're going to be arrested. And of course, they took you out of the jail, arrested you, took you right into the court, the Hinds County Jail, processed you in, and later on, because the jail started getting filled up, they transferred many of us out, as has been spoken to Parchment State Penitentiary. So my involvement came as a result, I think, of that image of the bus. And here I was, a young student, preparing for ministry eventually, who would be called upon to preach the essence of the gospel as liberation. That how could I then stand in a pulpit, eventually, preach and teach the power of liberation, and not put it in the context of my own life story. And it's because of that that I think led to my involvement. And it's one of the greatest decisions I ever made in my life, because it has managed to help me develop relationships, not only with fellow freedom riders, but meet so many people like yourselves who want to hear the story again about the freedom rides. And we'll save the rest for questions.